I sent like 20, maybe 30 emails today. Now, you know what? Some of them I sent to the same person. I probably sent 50 emails today. It was horrible.
That sounds...
It was absolutely ridiculous. So, but anyway, now we get to talk about Alexander, who didn't have email.
So, yes, so today we're going to finish the story of Alexander with a focus on his character rather than his deeds this time. Well, I guess those two things kind of go hand in hand, but...
I was about to argue that.
But so not his conquering movements of armies, but the things that he personally did, like as a human being.
Now, what did he do when he was conquering with his armies? Did he do that as a spirit?
As a what? Sorry.
You said the things that he did as a human being.
Oh.
As though his conquering was not done.
Yes, he
as though his conquering was not done.
He was a dog when he did his conquering, you see, and then and
a dog?
No, I'm sorry. He was a marionette, and then he became a real boy.
Oh, got it. He was a pirouette, and then he became
marionette.
Does anyone know what a pirouette is?
Isn't that like a dance move?
Yeah, exactly. Good. I'm talking to the linguist. I can't do anything.
Yeah, sorry. I spent all day thinking about long-distance anaphors and diactic pronouns and fun stuff. So today, the plan is to discuss some of the events that made Alexander such an interesting character that he's recommended by name for generations, and he earned himself the title of the Great, aside from the fact that he was a beyond excellent military commander.
I wonder if something can be called podcastable, you know? Like, all of our rulers are podcastable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, most of our guys are going to be podcastable. You know, we should...
I would hope all of them are.
Okay, so really what I've wrote down a whole lot of stuff, and I probably should have given it a better order, but I didn't. So this is kind of a list of facts that I've got. And I realized just now that this very first one probably should have come later, but I'm going to put it first because I wrote it first.
Okay.
And that is that after Alexander had conquered Persia, according to Plutarch, he sent a message home. And the content of this message was to declare that the wartime emergency was over. And every city under his control that was ruled by a tyrant or a despot should be allowed to form an independent constitutional government of their own choosing. And he called for the reconstruction of Plataea, that never really recovered from the great battle that took place there in the Persian War.
How did that go? I'm sure there were some difficulties in reestablishing governments.
I suppose that many of these cities had some kind of constitution in the first place.
You know what I'm betting they all did?
What did they all do?
I bet they chose a new king by telling them all to get a horse to neigh.
Oh, man. Yeah. That's what all the Greek cities did after Alexander conquered Persia.
Oh my gosh. Quick neighing horses, fetching top dollar.
All right, yeah, and so apparently with this letter, or around the same time as he sent this letter, he also sent a significant portion of the spoils of war to a Greek athlete from Italy, so from Magna Graecia, who used his own money to raise an army and build a ship so that he could participate in the Persian War when the rest of Magna Graecia refused to get involved.
Wow.
Yeah. So Alexander really loved this idea of heroic valor and solidarity with your ethnic and linguistic kin. That's something that he thought was important, and he wanted to reward it with this story of this almost mythical character whose name I didn't write down. Probably
That's pretty amazing.
Because it's inconsequential, but that is pretty amazing. just what this one guy managed to do. Well, he was a very successful athlete. He had won at least one Olympic Games. He had the cash. But it's really cool to think that this one guy, participated in the Persian War because he wanted to.
Yeah, and put so much money towards it.
Yeah, and especially considering that Italy probably wasn't in danger.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, even if Italy wasn't in danger, after he made that investment, his wealth certainly was,
So, next story. So, after the Battle of Gaugamela that won Alexander Babylonia, and pretty much won him the war, Alexander's men, they found a well of this strange substance that they called naphtha. It was black and sticky, and it burned easily. They'd found crude oil.
Okay.
In a blinding show of downright stupidity.
Oh, no.
After seeing a demonstration of this substance's capabilities in the street, Alexander's personal aide suggested testing the power of the substance on his court singer and aide, a guy named Stephanus, saying that if it burned him and didn't go out, it must be powerful indeed. Alexander agreed, and the boy was really, really excited. So they covered him in the stuff, and they set him on fire.
Zeus, intervene!
And yeah, the result was about what you would expect. Alexander pretty much immediately regretted this decision, and luckily some men just then arrived carrying water that was supposed to be for a bath, and they managed to put Stephanus out, but he had already suffered very severe burns, and he never recovered.
Poor Stephanus.
Poor Stephanus, man.
Oh my gosh. Why do you have to put it on a person?
I bet that other guy really didn't like Stephanus.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I bet you can totally pit people against each other. I had a dream that Stephanus ate your favorite horse. Crazy stuff like that, ruining people's lives.
Yeah, we are going to see some of that later. But for now, do you remember when we talked about the Theban rebellion last week? So Alexander, he often follows the Machiavellian school of capturing hostile cities. If you kill everybody, nobody will be left to rebel against you. And so that's what he did to Persepolis. The entire city was put to the sword. I was speaking with my Iranian friend Mohsen this week, and that is the one thing that Alexander is remembered for in Iran. In fact, up until about the 15th century, whenever Alexander's name was mentioned or written, he was given the epithet, the Accursed. Not only because he destroyed the city, but because he represented the end of the height of Persia's power with the Achaemenids. The more Persian empires would come after, but none of them ever quite reached the glory of the empire of Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes. Mm. There are two people in modern Persian that now get that epithet, and one of them has a name that I can't remember. He was the Arab who conquered Iran, even though they kind of adopted their religion, which is a bit strange. And the other is Genghis Khan.
Ah, yeah, well known.
Yeah, he also conquered Persia and did some nasty things. Alexander, he wasn't actually very comfortable with this decision to destroy Persepolis at the time. Plutarch mentions a letter that he had acquired where Alexander discusses this decision with one of his friends. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that it was the safest thing to do, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't happy with it. And yet, still, he was sometimes prone to hasty action, such as, while dining in Persepolis, one of his Athenian guests at a dinner party suggested that she be allowed to burn the house of Xerxes, who burned her home in Athens. Alexander, he jumped at the idea, and he led a mob to the palace, and the Macedonians provided the group torches, thinking that this meant they would destroy the city and go home. But whatever the story is, somehow he came to set the fire on he set the palace on fire, and most historians agree that he, again, regretted this decision and had the fires quenched.
Yeah. I would regret it as well. There's probably a lot of valuable things inside of there.
Almost certainly, yeah.
And, I mean, it's probably a beautiful building. No, definitely a beautiful building.
Definitely a beautiful building. I think the ruins of it are still visible in Persepolis today.
Yeah, he probably should have burnt something else of Xerxes for that woman.
So one of the most important part of Alexander's personality is that he is famous for giving gifts. So one of the Paeonians came to him with the head of one of Alexander's enemies and said that in his country, such a present would be rewarded with a gold cup. So Alexander says, I can do you one better. Have this cup and fill it with our best wine, and you can keep the cup after you've had your drink.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
When a camel, laden with Alexander's gold, was worn by the strain of its weight, one of the Macedonians took the treasure off the camel and started carrying it himself. And when Alexander saw this guy, he said, don't be weary. Carry it just a little further yet to your tent, because everything that you're carrying, I give it to you.
Nice.
Yeah. He was known to write letters to his friends who didn't take gifts from him, who refused his gifts, and he scolded them and threatened to end their friendships if they wouldn't let him give them stuff. There was one boy who was working for Alexander as a
burn victim,
a server in a ball game that is translated in my copy of Plutarch as tennis.
Okay.
I have no idea how similar it actually is to tennis, but he was playing this ball game, and Alexander never gave gifts to this guy because he didn't ask. And one day, the ball boy, he stops giving balls to the king. And when he's asked why, he says, well, you don't ask for it. And then Alexander laughed, and he piled a bunch of gifts on top of him.
Very nice.
So one time, he tried to give a loyal and effective Persian ruler more land to control than he had under Darius, doubling the holdings that he had previously. And the nobleman rejected this gift. And he said, before, we had only one Darius, but now you have made many Alexanders, referring to how he made everybody live like kings.
Mm-hmm.
But even though he lavished his friends with gifts, he wasn't an idiot, and he never forgot where he came from, and he reproached his friends who spent the gifts on lots of servants and oils to anoint their bodies and mile-long hunting nets and rich perfumes and yada yada. And he famously said, indulgence is for slaves, labor is for princes. And he continued to live a simple military life despite his wealth.
I like that.
I like that too.
Now, what is a mile-long hunting net used for?
Presumably catching lots of game all at once. Like, you get 100 servants to carry this net, and you're like, everybody run, and then in 10 minutes, close the net, and then you'll catch something.
So I guess you have to do that in a field.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you can't really do that in a forest, can you?
Catch, like, a deer. I don't know.
Well, I suppose you can just, like, make a mile radius circle, I guess, whatever. A mile circumference circle, and you'll probably catch something inside of it.
Yeah, but it'll be very difficult in a forest. Interesting.
Very interesting.
That sounds useful. I don't think that's that indulgent, you know?
Well, it's probably a little bit indulgent. I mean, I guess practically yes, but think about
the other ways to get game.
Think about the other ways to get game. Like, yeah, so Alexander was all about the importance of hard work and working for what you have. The whole idea of catching huge amounts of game with a net it makes sense to me that would be repulsive to him, because he would say, go and, like, take a spear and kill it yourself.
Yeah,
that's the way that a man hunts. That seems like Alexander's personality. So let's see. He tried to be as charitable to the people in his kingdom as he could. He would often sit in judgment, and he would literally hold his hand over his ear on the side of the prosecutor so that he could be more empathetic to the accused. However, that didn't last forever. Later in his life, he was known for giving harsh punishments and judgments, especially to those who dishonored him, because his reputation was very important to him. So we left off last time with the capture of Persia and the death of Darius, right?
Yep.
So a lot of these stories were about Alexander's time in Persia, but after he had consolidated power in Persia, he decided to head north to the Caspian coast, which at the time he thought was a bay of the ocean, even though geographers at the time knew better.
Sometimes the information doesn't get around, or you can be incredulous if you're Alexander.
Yeah, like Plutarch says that there were geographers in Alexander's empire that knew that the Caspian was a sea, not a bay, but Alexander called it a bay anyway.
Maybe it was his upbringing and old habits die hard.
I guess so. Yeah, so it was on this campaign in the north, in Scythia, that Alexander began to assume the local dress and customs, and he started hiring locals who knew Greek to spread amongst his army to act as interpreters.
Good.
He wanted to make it seem not like he was an invading or occupying army, but one that was in its rightful place as the rulers of the country, and this kind of seemed to work. There weren't very significant battles that took place during this campaign. He didn't get a lot of resistance from the locals.
Smart.
However, it did not get him the love of the Macedonians, who thought that he was going native, and he did his best to accommodate them by using the Greek manner when dealing with Greeks and the Asian manner when dealing with Asians, but they never quite got over it. So, do you recall Alexander's friend and right-hand man Parmenio?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the part where his story ends.
Tragically?
Yes. During these battles, he was usually given the left flank, which Alexander kind of abandoned to go with his, hammer and anvil technique.
Yep.
And he was often forced to turn back and help Parmenio because he was losing the line.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this reason, Alexander was kind of suspicious of him. And he intercepted one of the Persian women that Parmenio had won in the battle, and he told her to spy on him.
Ooh.
So Parmenio, he started to live very extravagantly, more than a lot of Alexander's other friends, and he often spoke badly of Alexander, calling him a foolish boy, and saying that Alexander only conquered so far because of his father and Parmenio himself.
Drama.
Eventually it came to pass that Parmenio was alerted of a plot on Alexander's life, and he failed to pass on the message. Twice again, 2 more times, it was brought to him, but he did nothing about it. So the mistress told Alexander what she heard, and Alexander captured one of the conspirators, confirmed the plot, killed the conspirators, and then had Parmenio himself assassinated.
Yeah, he couldn't trust him.
Yeah. So, but after this was, unfortunately, a significant event in the story, because after this, Alexander became increasingly paranoid.
Can't blame him.
Yeah, when another one of his friends, a man named Cletus, joked about Alexander's Asiatic tendencies, saying that the Macedonians are overpunished when they congratulate the dead because they died before they could see the Macedonians beaten with Median rods. Begging Persian ministers for an audience with their Macedonian king, Alexander viciously rebuked him and reached for his dagger, but was held back, and Cletus was led out of the room. He came back in through another door, reciting a line from Sophocles' Antigone, "Ah me, in Greece an evil custom reigns," and then Alexander jumped up, snatched a spear, and ran him through on the spot.
Oh my gosh. Alex was having a bad day.
Very bad day. When he came to his senses and realized what he had done, he took the spear and tried to stab himself in the throat with it, and he had to be tackled and restrained to keep him from killing himself.
Oh my gosh.
And he spent weeks afterwards in tears.
Oh my gosh, that's so sad.
So sad.
So
then after Alexander finished his conquest of Scythia, he turned south to invade India. And let's call it an interesting display, he attempted to motivate and mobilize his increasingly large army by destroying all the wealth they had. He burned his own baggage train he burned his own baggage train and then asked everyone else to do the same thing. And they totally did.
Why did they just leave it?
I don't know. They spread the useful goods amongst each other and then destroyed the rest before setting off to obtain new riches in the Indus Valley.
All right.
And at this point, I left a note for myself that has a page number on it. So let me run to that page number. Okay, yes. So I don't want to dwell very long on the Indian campaign. It's the sources are not extremely good for it, and there's nothing super duper interesting that happens. But there is this one kind of cool story that Alexander captured a group of Indian philosophers. These were called the Gymnosophistae.
Okay.
Which, if my Greek is any good, means the naked arguers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
New reality show, naked arguing instead of naked dating.
Yeah. So these guys had been instrumental in causing a revolt against Alexander in India, and they had caused lots of trouble for Alexander and the Macedonians. And so these guys were well known for short, pithy answers, and so Alexander gave all of them some very difficult questions. And he would tell them that he would kill the man who gave him the worst answer. So he asks the first philosopher whether the living or the dead are more numerous. He answered, the living, for the dead are not. The second, he asked which breeds the largest animals, the sea or the land, and he answers, the land, for the sea is only a part of it.
The sea is only a part of the land?
Yeah, the sea is only a part of the land. He's taking the land to mean all of the earth.
With the sea on top of it.
Yeah. So the third guy, he asks, which is the cleverest of beasts? And he answers, that which man has not yet discovered.
I like that one the best.
That's a good one. So the fourth philosopher, he asked why he made Sabas rebel, and he answered, because I wished him either to live or to die with honor. The fifth philosopher, he asked which he thought was first, the day or the night, and he answered, the day was first, by one day.
I like that.
When he saw that the king was surprised by this answer, he said, impossible questions require impossible answers.
I like that.
So the sixth guy was asked how a man could make himself most beloved, and he answered by being very powerful and not yet feared by his subjects.
Okay.
The eighth was asked how a man could become a god, and he answered by doing that which is impossible for a man to do.
Good.
Simple enough. Yeah. So the ninth guy was asked which is stronger, life or death, and he answers life, because it endures such terrible suffering.
It does.
And the last guy was asked how long it takes for an honorable man to live, and he answers, as long as he thinks it better for him to live than to die.
Yes, very good.
So Alexander then, he turns to a judge, and he says to give your decision, which one gave the worst answer. And he said that they had each answered worse than the other.
So the judge was one of them too.
Yep.
So
that's that story.
I wouldn't have killed any of them. I was gonna say after you told me like who got killed, I'd have been like, no, this is fun. We don't have TV. We need to ask smart people dumb questions.
Yeah. So he wound up giving everybody presents and dismissing them unhurt.
Hey, that's way better than killing one of them.
Yeah.
No need for mops.
Yep. Next, after Alexander, he did some conquering of some Indian city-states, but didn't make a ton of progress in the Indus Valley. So he decided to sail down the river because he wanted to see the outer oceans. And he captured some cities as he went, because that's what you do. After reaching the mouth of the Indus and seeing the Indian Ocean, and then he returned through Persia, and he revived the old Persian custom of giving every woman in the city of Persepolis a gold coin upon the arrival of a victorious king. which, by the way, is a reason for which previous Persian kings would avoid Persis at all costs.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Now, at this point, it was starting to become clear that his Macedonian companions, the Hetairoi, were starting to get weary from the years and years of conquering, and a lot of them were injured or otherwise incapable. So Alexander, he began training a group of Persians to replace them, which led to outroar. Alexander responded by instantly dismissing them all. He just said, "You're all fired." But they surrounded his tent for 2 days, unarmed, wailing and begging not to be sent home in disgrace.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Alexander, he obliged, and he talked to them like his friends, and he gave those who were injured a whole bunch of gifts, and he sent them home with instructions that they were to be provided for, and offered the best seats at plays and games.
I just want to say that gold coin thing for every woman does not scale. That would not work today. Like,
No, that definitely
what
wouldn't
if the
work
Pope
today.
had to give everyone he saw $1 when he came to America the last time he was here? Like, that just does not work.
That doesn't work at all. It's really a weird custom.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe when you're a conquering king and you're an expanding empire, then naturally you're going to have lots of money. But as soon as Persia started to move into decline, then that became utterly impractical.
Yeah. Ugh, silly Persians.
That's what tends to happen over history, is that empires expand and they survive based on the spoils of war from these expansions, and then they hit the maximum that they can get, and then the economy falls out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Alexander was on his way back towards Macedonia, and while in the city of Ecbatania, which is kind of north of Babylon, he came down with a fever, and over the course of about a week, it started to get worse, and towards the end of that week, he was stuck in his bed, and when his generals came to see him because they were, concerned, he couldn't talk, and the Macedonians were afraid that he was dead. And so they clamored at the gates of the palace in Ecbatania, and they forced their way in to see their king. And they filed past his bed, one by one, dressed in just their tunics, unarmed. 2 of his friends then ran across the river to an oracle at the temple of Serapis, and they asked whether Alexander should be taken there to the temple. And the god answered that he should be left alone. And that same day, Alexander died.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Thus ends the tale of Alexander the Great, a man who was elevated to king at a young age and yet managed to quell his youthful extravagances, manage his urges, and conquer the world. He was great to his friends and terrible to his enemies, and he definitely left a lasting mark on the history of Europe and Asia. His empire wound up being partitioned among his several generals, and very few, actually none, of those surviving empires lasted for a significant amount of time.
Well, that's okay. I'm sure the people did not mind, and hard for an empire to stay around when it's disjointed.
So those are my remarks on the character and history of Alexander the Great. Would you have anything you'd like to say about Alexander in closing?
My middle name's Alexander.
And now you know a lot about the history of that name.
Yeah.
And so next week I'm going to have to tell you that my middle name is Hannibal, or whatever we decide to do next.
Oh my gosh. That would raise a lot of questions.
That would be very interesting. So,
hey, Professor, I would prefer to go by Hannibal. I don't like my birth name. I prefer Hannibal.
I prefer
Or just
Hannibal.
Han.
Please, yeah, just Han works. Hanny sometimes.
My gosh. That would go very poorly.
So I don't know if we're doing Hannibal next, but that should be indication that we're leaving Greece behind and moving on towards some Roman figures, or figures that are important in Roman history.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. So
thanks for listening.
That'll work. Okay. Cut there.
Cut.
Yep.
I'll be right back.
You got it. Da la 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 da.
Turn my light off. I want to start getting sleepy.